Have you ever left the emergency room and looked at your discharge instructions and thought, why are they telling me to see my doctor? Didn't I just see a provider in the ER? Or maybe you were told to follow up with a specialist and wondered, didn't you already do the test? Why do I need to see somebody else? Well, that's a question I hear pretty regularly. So today, let's talk about why your emergency room visit may only be the first step in figuring out what's going on. Hi there. I'm Kisha Pickford, a nurse practitioner, and I've spent more than 25 years working in healthcare, much of that time in emergency medicine. And welcome to ER Real Talk, where I answer some of the questions patients ask and give you my perspective on what may be happening behind the scenes during your emergency room visit. And today's question is a good one. If I've already been evaluated in the ER, why do I still need to follow up with my doctor or a specialist? So let's talk about it. You know, one of the biggest things I want people to understand is that emergency care and ongoing medical care serve different purposes. When you come into the emergency department, we're primarily trying to determine, is there something happening right now that requires emergency treatment? Do you need to be admitted to the hospital? Do you need emergency surgery or another urgent procedure? Is there something dangerous that we need to identify and treat today? And ultimately, can you safely continue your care outside of the hospital? You know, that's a very different question from why has this been happening for the last 6 months and what are we going to do about it long term? You know, this is where I think some of the confusion happens. You might come to the ER with abdominal pain, headaches, dizziness, back pain, chest discomfort, or another symptom. We may do the blood work, imaging, an EKG, or whatever test is appropriate for your situation. And sometimes all of that test is reassuring, and that's good. But reassuring emergency testing doesn't necessarily mean there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. It may mean we haven't found something that requires emergency treatment or hospitalization today. And those are two very different statements. And that's where follow-up becomes important. Your regular healthcare provider can do something that we usually can't do very well in the emergency department, and that's follow you over time. They can look at what your blood pressure was 6 months ago compared with today. They can see whether a lab value has slowly been changing. They can adjust medications and then see how you respond. They can order non-emergency testing. They can also address preventative care. And they can bring you back in a few weeks or a few months and say, okay, did this get better? And that's continuity of care. The emergency department isn't really designed to provide that kind of long-term follow-up. Then there are situations where the ER evaluation identifies something that isn't necessarily an emergency today, but still it deserves further evaluation. And that's when you may hear follow up with cardiology, follow up with orthopedics, or see a neurologist, or follow up with gastroenterology. And patients sometimes ask me, well, why can't you just take care of that here? Because that specialist may be able to provide testing, treatment, procedures, or ongoing evaluation that simply isn't part of an emergency department visit. We may identify the next step, but that doesn't necessarily mean the next step needs to happen in the emergency room. And here's another important point. Sometimes we treat your symptoms in the emergency department and you may feel much better. And that's wonderful. But feeling better doesn't always mean the underlying cause or issue has been completely resolved. Maybe we controlled the pain, maybe we treated the nausea, or maybe your blood pressure improved, or maybe your breathing improved. And those things can make it appropriate for you to go home, but you may still need someone to determine why it happened, whether additional treatment is necessary, and how to reduce the chance of it happening again. And this is the part I really want people to hear. When your discharge paperwork says follow up with your primary care provider or follow up with this specialist, don't automatically think that's just something we put on everybody's paperwork. There may be something from your visit that needs to be rechecked. Maybe your symptoms need reassessment. Maybe a test needs to be repeated. Or maybe you need additional testing that isn't normally done in the emergency department. Or maybe we simply need somebody to make sure you're continuing to improve. Your ER visit and your follow-up care are often two pieces of the same puzzle. You know, after more than 25 years in healthcare, one thing I wish more people understood is that the emergency department doesn't replace having ongoing health care. We may take care of today's immediate problem, but your primary care provider and your specialists help manage what happens after today. And sometimes that's where the most important work begins. So when we say, please follow up, we're not necessarily passing you off or saying your concerns aren't important. Often we're saying we've taken care of the emergency portion. Now we want you to continue the evaluation with the person who can follow this over time. And I think understanding that distinction can make the whole process a little less frustrating. So the next time you leave the emergency room and you see those words, follow up with your doctor, hopefully you'll understand a little better why they're there. And if there's something about in the emergency room visit that you've always wondered about, put your question in the comments. It might become a future episode of ER Real Talk. And as I always like to say, I don't know who will see this video today, tomorrow, or years from now, but this is my perspective based on the experience and the information available at the time I'm sharing this video. Healthcare is always evolving, so always follow the advice of your own healthcare team for your specific situation. Until next time, take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next ER Real Talk. Bye for now.